What does freedom mean to you? Finding your own definition is key to living well. In this episode, we explore how to make freedom personal and why it matters. Welcome back to the You Potential podcast. Today, I am joined by Hawksley Workman, a Juno Award-winning musician, fearless genre bender, and poetic storyteller who knows what it takes to live a life well lived. In our conversation, Hawksley shares how he navigates creative blocks, embraces creativity, and finds his way through the darker moments of life. He also opens up on how money plays into his sense of freedom and why living simply can feel richer than chasing more, and how telling our own stories can change how we see ourselves. This episode is all about creativity, freedom, and finding meaning in life's messiness. I hope you enjoy this conversation with Hawksley Workman. Let's go. Hawksley Workman, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
It is a real pleasure to have you on the show. We are just having a little conversation about the venues that I've seen you in and around Edmonton, and to be able to have a one-on-one conversation with you is something that I've been looking forward to. Before we get into it, though, I want to let the audience know a bit of my thoughts on my guest, as I do. So I want to start with saying, Hawksley, you've worn many hats as a songwriter, performer, producer, podcaster, author, theater director, and performer. You seem to be a true musical shapeshifter. Your artistry seems to define boundaries, constantly evolving, yet it seems like, from our view, unmistakably always Hawksley Workman. Over the years, I have noticed that you've left this lasting impact on the Canadian music and arts and the whole culture around music, which has been fun for me as an audience to observe your journey. I remember the first time my brother, his friend, Rudy Klinger, his name was, brought home your album for him and the girls from HMV, and we listened to it. And from then we were all hooked. Soon we saw you at the Sidetrack Cafe, and then it just goes on and on and on.
I love hearing.
I don't want to get too cheesy on you, but my wife and I chose your song Safe and Sound for our wedding song. So
Beautiful.
as a longtime listener, it's been a privilege to witness your journey. Today, though, I'm excited to chat with you about ideas that have been percolating around reinvention, creativity, success, and how money influences all of the above. So welcome.
Thanks, Sean. Boy, I like all this. Thanks for the warm, thoughtful intro. And I'm very excited to sort of talk in this general direction. I feel like I get asked to talk a lot about, what I do and being an artist, but I was very excited at the idea of being able to talk about money with you and other things, but money's interesting to me.
Yeah, I mean, it impacts everything, whether we realize it or not. It really, truly does.
Yeah. And I think I was saying to you before we started recording, like there is this sort of, I think if you were to ask like 100 people on the street, they would assume that the sort of personal branding of most artists is, I don't know anything about money. I don't want to know anything about money. Artists don't want to tangle with money, which I've always thought was an interesting. And I definitely, when I was young and like sort of fronting my personal brand character, I think that the 20-something version of me would have said, oh, I don't know anything about money. Even though I've always been very frugal, and I've always had a sense that money was going to give me a certain amount of freedom to do the things I wanted to do. And being an independent artist at a time that it's very hard to be an independent artist, I find if I have a little bit of money and a soft place to land, I never made $1 million, but I've always been frugal. And you can be a rich person if you live within your means. And as an artist, I've just lived within my means and allowed myself to kind of operate within. It was very intentional that I would have the freedom that not always being scared how I was going to pay my rent was going to allow me to be the person I wanted to be as an artist,
Yeah. Okay. A lot of different wonderful pieces there we can go into. A word you said maybe 2 or 3 times was freedom.
Yeah.
What relationship, if any at all, have you come to see money and freedom have?
Well, they're one and the same in my own mind. Like, I feel like freedom is essential to who I am as a person. I feel like going back to when I was a kid in school, I was a good student. Teachers liked me. I did well. Somewhere deep in me was sort of a rebellious character. My teachers liked me, and I never chose to sort of rebel against the system in that way. What I found early on as a student is that by sort of being likable, working hard, generally having a passionate attitude, it was amazing the kind of freedom that came with that, because teachers all of a sudden they left you alone. They just knew you were going to do the thing you said you were going to do, and all of a sudden you weren't under anybody's radar. And from a very young age, I enjoyed the feeling that I could create and make even my schoolwork. I could do the things I wanted to do without there being a whole lot of eyes on me, mostly because I was happy to conform to some degree within the context a lot of the rules. I could find my places to rebel that were more my own personal side hustle, my own personal like energy projects were rebelling outside of the system. But I didn't need to kind of confront the system in that way when I was young. So all of that just to say is that freedom is absolutely essential to me. Like I feel even in the Canadian spirit, I feel like with the amount of space we grew up with in this country, and just generally how, as a Gen X kid, I feel like freedom was a predominant influence. It was a predominant bias. Going out of the house with my brother and my dog and our bicycles, like I feel like we had a sense that we were connected to something limitless when we were connected to nature, when we were connected to the lakes, connected to the woods, when we were cognizant of the coming and going of different animals and the seasons. I feel like our rural upbringing sort of allowed us to marinate very naturally in a feeling of this infinite freedom that I have more or less become addicted to. Um, Not addicted. I just think it's who I am. I feel like even through my music, you'd mentioned it a couple times in the intro about my shape shifting and my sort of, my restlessness. I've never sort of locked into one particular sound or one particular, job. I've done a lot of things, and that all kind of falls under that heading of freedom to me, and it's absolutely essential. And I think that it's meant that I've always wanted to keep my own sort of personal finances in a place where that freedom could be guaranteed, which again is to say that I never made $1 million. I never had a huge amount of money come in my career. I've had some good things happen to me, but I never got that like amount of money where all of a sudden I wouldn't have to work again. I still have to do my job. I still have to be invested in my job in a real way. It still pays the bills in a very real and effect. And it's just not something I've been able to sort of escape that in that way. I feel like in some ways I occupy a very rare mantle of like middle class musician, which is something that not many people get to be.
Your answer has really encapsulated my journey on this podcast, is like identifying freedom in the context of financial freedom, where often we hear financial freedom is like having enough money, you don't need to work anymore, etc. But for me, it's like at the core of the soul of who we are. And it seems to me the way you're explaining that freedom is like it's connected to your soul rather to the bank account. And I'm going to stop here, but my thinking is, would you agree or disagree that someone can have financial freedom, but not that inner freedom that you talked about?
Absolutely. I mean, I heard a personal finance type guru talk about how he was working with a client who sort of made between $3 and $9 million a year, and that person always spent outside their means, which meant that even though they were a millionaire by virtue of the amount of money they were making annually, they weren't rich in his mind because they were always it was crunch time on the monthly, because that person just had a habit of living outside their means. I think as an artist very early on, I could see that I was going to make enough money that I was going to be able to support myself and my family in the way that I wanted to, but my wealth was going to come from my deep commitment to frugality, and that my own journey is something that's happening internally. Like you say, like I've really stopped spending money on stuff to some degree. I got a nice bicycle for Christmas. I don't really buy instruments anymore. I try not to buy gear too much. I don't have an obsession with needing to continue to pad out my like guitar collection or these types of things. For me, I'm going to turn 50 this year. And again, this all boils down to freedom and my ability to be myself as an artist, as somebody who wants to do absurd stuff, who sometimes wants to make music that might be too difficult to listen to. And I don't ever want to be making artistic decisions based on the fact that I need to pay the bills in the immediacy. Look, and I don't begrudge any artist for finding themselves in that situation. The personal finance journey is everybody's unto their own. And none of this is meant as a judgment on anybody's situation. My own personal journey is I live well within my means, which gives me a feeling that I am rich. But that richness comes from the fact that my wife and I have the space to be and do the things and be the people that we want to be. It's not really about what I own. I don't own a lot of stuff other than some music gear. For me, it's about coming home from tour and being able to think the thoughts I want to think, say and feel the things I want to say and feel, and be the kind of artist I want to be. And if I had a gnawing, sort of desperate financial situation that was always clawing away at me, I'd never be able to relax in the kind of way that I could get on stage and be myself in the kind of fullness that I want to be myself in. Do you know what I mean? Like,
This is the freedom that we all seek.
absolutely.
And
That's what I'm after anyway.
yeah, and again, this is what the exploration of this podcast is on, is chatting to interesting people and having conversations around that freedom, that is that soulful freedom, as opposed to sometimes on social media we see money and freedom looks like flying around on fancy planes. But
Yeah.
but you said something. You want to come home and be the people we want. Think music, write music. What more can you ask for?
Not much more. I mean, I look at how extremely tribal our political and social lives have kind of become, and it's makes me sad in a way. And I feel like I've never felt more disinvested in joining a tribe one way or the other. And I feel like there's a lot of judgment and criticism among basically the little people. I see people criticizing their neighbors, people criticizing the people they work with, and there's I think a lot of there's a sense that I get the sense that a lot of us in Canada these days are maybe feeling even economically like we're spinning our tires a little bit, that feeling like that we can't, I don't know, move into that phase of achievement that we hope to. Whenever I sort of start to think about my money life, having more, having less, I re-examine my own internal picture and to make sure that that's as succinct and as manageable as possible. I went through my depression years. I went through my heavy drinking years. I went through my suicidal ideation years. Like I think a lot of people are trying to reconcile the anguish and sadness that's very obvious and apparent in the kind of lives we're living. If you invest too heavily in the news, if you invest too heavily in the negative biased information, you can start to grow the thing that you put too much of your attention on. I can definitely be accused of investing too heavily in negative thinking. And that's been part of my own journey. All of that falls in my mind under this umbrella heading of freedom, which there is a financial piece to that, but there's a lot of just making sure that your own psyche and your internal mechanisms emotionally and mentally are operating in a way that is as that is uncritical of yourself and others, that you're not investing in any unnecessary self-loathing, all this stuff. But that stuff is it's heavily on offer. It's heavily on sale now from the internet and from, there's a lot of weight to get up from underneath. And like I say, when I come home, I want to be able to feel and think and be the person that I know that I am. And I feel like my job and my career has really it's the greatest fortune that I've found in what I've done for 25 years is that that freedom has been basically emblematic of my daily existence for that long.
I love this answer. And what I'm hearing you talk about is like, I mean, life is anything but linear. And we have these moments that we're wrestling inside. And with these things on sale or this opportunity to try to spend your money in this way or go make this money seems to offer temporary relief to that internal wrestling that we have. I have often noticed that if we're so set on trying to make more money or absolutely have to buy this car or need to buy this house, it's a wonderful opportunity to almost have a portal into that wrestling match into ourselves, which takes some surrendering, some acceptance. I'm curious, have you had moments where there's all this internal wrestling, and whether it's money is the projection or more fame or success, have they derailed you from that internal journey?
That external noise is always attempting to derail your internal journey. I feel like that is the crux of the duality of modern life as we're trying to live it and understand it. There wasn't a plebiscite that went out to the world in the late 90s that asked humanity whether or not we wanted to invite the internet into our lives, but we did invite the internet into our lives, or we've been forced to make room for it. It's a highly disruptive feature that kind of came out of nowhere, and all of a sudden the structures of everything that I understood in the way that life was created, and the architecture of the way life looked in the 1980s and through the 90s and the late 20th century, when I was sort of young and then a young adult, like that was all thrown away to kind of accommodate this very disruptive force that came in, and in many ways is forcing us to create new systems. And so, geez, I sort of have talked myself into a bit of a lather here, Sean. I'm not exactly sure where we were going with this, but I know that I've been harping a lot on the fact that the internet has created this thing that's highly disruptive. It's disrupted the universe of the industry that I work within. What was I getting at? What was the question? Can you remind me? Sorry, John.
That's all right. About how these external
All right.
attractive things like money, fame can
So yeah,
derail us from our internal journeys.
so I think that we have now the internet is particularly insidious. I guess that's why I was talking about it. Like I feel like, I was a child of the 80s and I grew up in a 3-channel universe in a black and white TV for the better part of my youth. And, those external forces that were demanding my attention were in no way as strong or as persuasive as they are for young people who are having to deal with a universe where they are a target audience for some corporate entity somewhere or other. So they're always going to be these younger people are going to be dealing with these forces that are well-oiled, well-focused, grouped. And, I think that I'm just the right age where a lot of my formative habits and behaviors were created before the internet and before there seemed to be this race to the bottom to join some tribe, to be saying something that is uninclusive or whatever it is that we're sort of being railroaded into believing we're supposed to do and feel. I just didn't have to join uh with such a grand need to fit in. And I feel like in that way, which isn't to say that I'm not dealing constantly with my own internal mechanism. My wife and I talk constantly about how we're just that type of person where we've got the hood up a lot on our psyches. Like we're always sort of tinkering with the motor. And that's because no amount of personal development or, self-help, no amount of that allows you to park the car indefinitely in the driveway of I'm finally there. Now I can turn the car off and just enjoy bliss for the rest of my existence. My bliss is being thrown off hour by hour. If I get weak and I start to look at Twitter and I start to look at some negative stuff, it's like shit, my bliss has just been spoiled by some sort of inner dark wanting to have a disruption of this good feeling by bringing in information of darkness, information of biases, things that I don't like or prefer. But as soon as you start giving those things attention or focus, they start to grow in your reality. I feel like in many ways that's the Stoics have kind of come out in for me in the last couple of years, and that I think it was probably Seneca that talked about we suffer more in our minds than we do in reality, because a lot of the things we conjure in our minds never happen. Those things we worry about never come to pass, but we spend a lot of inner caloric energy to worry about stuff that should have never been in the buffet to begin with,
Yeah. Um, we're almost hardwired from our like evolutionary days to this negativity bias. Like, hey, how am I going to survive? But that's back in caveman days. So now, what really interested in, what you talked about a couple times though, is I'm going back to earlier how you said when we talked about freedom to be myself and then be the people we want. It seems to me that a way that you've been able to take that stoic view of maybe let's calm this chatter down that I'm not enough, etc., is you had this foundation on who Hawksley is, or to be myself. And I'm wondering how much of this simple life pre-internet that I've heard you talk about, and the words you've used is in the sticks in Huntsville, Ontario.
Yeah.
How much did that open opportunity, open landscape, and being in the woods, how much did that play into creating who you are, imagination and creativity?
Well, it's huge. You just said the words I was going to say. The basis of my answer will be imagination, creativity. That growing up in rural Ontario with my brother, no kids, no in the immediate, like, it's not like we could have walked to a friend's house. There was no kids nearby. So, and a 3-channel universe, as I already said, and a black and white TV, it meant that my brother and I spent most of our childhood outside in the woods with our dogs, on our bicycles, letting our imagination create the picture of the existence we were living in. If we were, the first house that we grew up in, there was this wonderful sort of pit that was dug out way in the woods. You'd have to kind of go way back there, and somebody thought there was gravel back there, and they were digging this pit. Well, that pit was Dagobah for us, or it was like a lot of Star Wars places, or it was like a G.I. Joe thing, or whatever it was. My brother and I were back there in the woods with a stick, and that stick could be a bow and arrow, it could be a gun, it could be a magician's wand, like a stick could have been a lot of stuff for my brother and I, because our imaginations were so powerful back then that a stick, our dog, and our bicycles, and some just the general magic that's available in the woods was all that we needed to feel absolutely fulfilled. And I look at my brother, who is very successful. He's very financially successful. I sort of feel like that was one of the edges that Gen X got, in a way, was that a heavy reliance on our imagination. And once you start trusting your imagination to create or manifest the reality that you want to live in, like, again, we're going to some esoteric places, but I think that that's part of the spiritual nature of what I'm talking about. And that freedom is that I'm creating the life I want to exist in. Sometimes that's polluted when I let too much Twitter or too much news in. I eradicate that, and all of a sudden, the energy that I'm putting into the creation of the life I want to live is quite succinct. And I think that it's because my brother and I became genius imaginers when we were young. Like, we were not given any crutches. We didn't have an iPad on the back of mom or dad's headrest. We were driving down a road. Like, we were just babbling until our parents told us stop talking, or we were given some game to play, or we watched out the window. Like, we just lived much more in the crux of our own thoughts and feelings. And I feel like in some ways I'm so blessed to have had that as sort of a formative piece of my upbringing. Now that we confront the 21st century and all the disruptive features of it, I can still access some of the fundamentals of growing up in the woods and having my imagination be the thing that the better part of my life is predicated on. And to be quite frank, Sean, my imagination, the better part of my life, is still predicated on my imagination. Like, it's not like very much has changed. In fact, very little.
When I think of wealth, I mean, the origin word of wealth is well-being.
Okay, interesting.
Yeah, and to me, that's a sense of wealth, is to be able to sit in the back seat and be okay as a kid. And I'm guilty. I have 2 kids, and you know what? It's easier for mom and dad to give them that screen. But because that to me is like, when they get older and they have the ambush of technology, AI, if we don't have this baseline to be creativitors, what did you call them?
Yeah, like imaginers. Yeah.
Imaginers, then, we're easily persuade or are allured to go down a path that might not be our story. And we can end up our entire life sailing towards an island to realize it was the wrong island.
Yeah, I mean, I think using your imagination is a great way to acquaint with. Look, if you spend any time, like, on social media, and have even in any way indicated to your personal algorithm that you have a particular bias towards self-help, you'll see a lot of people talking about manifesting wealth, manifesting. It's it's a buzzword, but I do believe that you do create the reality you want to live in. And that's by virtue of the space you create in your mind. That is effectively your life, is happening in your mind at all times. Those negative voices, that's your life. It's happening. And that negative voice is a part of your life that if you pay attention to, or if you think about, like, trying to mitigate or eradicate that voice, or at least try to manage it, that becomes how you create more and more quietude, more and more focus, more and more freedom within the person you are. I used to be dogged in many ways by all my demons. And in some ways, because coming from the 90s, there was sort of the victim narrative that had come from afternoon television in the 90s that we're dealing with in a way that's kind of an unfettered way that seems kind of crazy to me now. But I definitely engaged in a lot of the victim narrative behavior that I feel like I learned in the late 90s from the Oprahs and the Phil Donahues and that sort of afternoon television thing that allowed or encouraged us to look at our lives and maybe focus on and grow out of proportion the negative aspects. And I definitely did enough of that because I thought it had aesthetic features that made sense to me as an artist. Like, oh yeah, no, I am not an artist who's been hard done by. And we've all had long lives that we've walked in and we've had our ups and downs, and I've had my ups and downs. But I would say as recently as 5 years ago, maybe slightly longer ago, I decided to get out of the victim business only because once you start to imagine yourself with having those limitations of I'll never be happy, or the real me is a depressed me, or the real me it can't get up from underneath the weight I'm feeling. I felt that stuff for decades. And then I feel like I cleaned it out and got in the habit of not allowing myself to identify with those things anymore because I feel like it was my own storytelling. You have to be careful of the stories you tell yourself and the stories you tell your family and friends, because when you tell those stories, then you have to live into their truths. And that can be very fucking destructive because if you're telling your story to yourself that you're a self-loather or that you're depressed or any of these things, you in some ways do have to live into that reality in order to make that storytelling true. And I feel like I started to kind of almost reverse engineer from the stories I had been telling myself for decades, those victim narratives, that I was going to undo those stories in hopes that by not saying that stuff anymore, I was going to teach my brain that that was no longer the reality that I was going to invest in. The reality that I was going to invest in was a reality of positivity, of self-belief, and of wanting good things for people. You know, I have had the sort of a spiritual kind of guru person in my life since I was a teenager, and I sort of have regular chats with her, and she always talks about the fact that if you're feeling particularly opinionated or judgmental, those are indicators that you're not living a spiritual life. Opinions and judgment are the opposite of spiritual existence. And so I find if I am invested too heavily in the internet and too heavily in what is happening in fashionable discussion, I find myself self-loathing and getting involved in that stuff that is the dark stuff that I don't have any business investing in because it's not me. It's not the me I want to spend time with, you know? The me I want to spend time with is somebody that doesn't self-loathe, that wants to believe in human potential and that we're building a human future that's going to be glorious. I still want to, that's where I want to exist, you know, because I lived in a dark place for a very, very, very long time. And I just don't ever want to go back to that. I say that, and I go back almost regularly. I go back on the daily. I still invest in this dark stuff. I say this out loud as what it is I'm attempting to manifest on a daily basis in terms of creating my own positivity. Um, yeah, it's big stuff. This is big stuff. This is the biggest stuff, I think.
This is the biggest stuff. And, you mentioned stories. I've always been fascinated with stories. The idea that like the stories are our lives and our lives are the stories that we tell ourselves, to what you're
Oh yeah.
saying. And for many of us, as we progress through our own journeys, we have these stories, sometimes poor stories, sometimes hard stories, sometimes stories that are good for us. But I think part of the human condition is to wrestle with different stories that we're telling ourselves. I heard you say that you had a spiritual individual in your life,
Mhm.
which I would assume helped get through these darker times. Are there other ways that you felt were helpful to pull you out of these dark times?
Um, well, I have a good marriage. That's one. My wife is wonderful.
Relationships are matter.
They really do. I think that I didn't invest in like friendships for many years. I'm a bit of a loner. And in the early part of my career, I lost some friends because I was busy on tour. And then when I came home, I just wanted to sort of hide away in my house and kind of lick my wounds before I went back out to do the job again. And there were people that I lost touch with who were offended by that back in those days. And some I've reconnected with, but others were like, "Oh, well, you think you're a fancy person now," and that was never the case. It was just that I was managing my own energy back then. Gosh, I forget again what you were asking. I've just been launching too deep into my own thoughts here, Sean.
No, that's all right. I was asking, are there other
Right.
modes or mediums that have helped you flow to the dark time?
Yeah, well, as my friend who my spiritual sort of friend, kind of reached out to me when I was a kid. I was about 15 or 16, and she sort of said, "Hey, you're I can kind of sense there's something going on here." And so she's sort of invited me to kind of invest fairly deeply in what might be considered sort of esoteric thinking on that side. I grew up, my family were, I would say, aesthetically Christian. My parents were young, so we grew up in the church. And I think in many ways I'm grateful that I had that relationship to some of those ideas. I think about even saying the Lord's Prayer when I was a kid, like whether you sort of are Christian or not, the fact that we were kids meditating on these heavy ideas about how we were going to treat one another and create an atmosphere of self-respect, and we would bow our heads and close our eyes and sort of meditate before we started our days. It would lend this sense of deep importance to the day we were about to have. And I think in some ways having a ritual like that, I think that my life as a Gen Xer, there was still fundamental rituals involved in my existence that I feel very grateful for to this day, that I have aspects of my life that were ritualized when I was young. I think that the self-help piece, however you want to parse that out, like I said, to have the hood up on yourself, not to see yourself as perpetually damaged goods. I think I came from that, like, I'm a broken toy that should just be left on the shelf, thinking in my 20s and 30s to, I'm just a work in progress like everybody else. And I think by marrying well, by deriving the intense self value I get from my work, like, I'm really lucky about that as well. That it's not even the accolades. It's not, oh, I get on stage and people applaud me. The applause piece has always felt like an absurdity I've never been able to entirely reconcile. But what I get to do in the room with an audience and create an atmosphere where we are co-producers of an extraordinary vibe that we get to all sort of feed in for the couple of hours that I'm on stage. I feel like that I have this very rare gift where I'm able to derive a lot of self-value from my work. In fact, I remember sort of talking to a therapist many years ago who had sort of said, you may have had some bumps in your childhood here and there, but your career has offered you this very rare opportunity to engage with a self-value piece that not everybody gets to have. And he said, in some ways, with this constant engagement with your own ability to create self-value through your career, you've been able to kind of correct some of the listing pieces of what may have been some of the leftover traumas or whatever it is we all are attempting to kind of piece together in our adult lives through therapy or what have you. He had sort of said, I was very lucky that within the context of my job, it allowed me to derive a feeling of personal power and fulfillment that has allowed me in some ways to piece together some of those trauma bits that may have got me more waylaid had I not had those opportunities. Maybe that's craziness.
No, I think the way you talk about this self-value in your career aligns with when when I explore what is a good life, what does well-being mean, a big component of it is meaning, like finding meaning in the work we're doing, meaning as a husband, as a father, etc.
Amen.
And often I talk with people who, they might have a nice paycheck, but that meaning is not there. That alignment with that self-value in the career is not always there. And it makes me think of one of your lines from The City is a Drag. You can always make money, but you can never make time.
Yeah.
How important is this observation as therapists made about how your self-value is aligned in your career? Would you trade it for $100 million or whatever? Forget the money, the amount.
But it's a great thing to game out. And I will say that, when the dust settled after Lover Fighter and millions of dollars had been spent by the label on me, and I went through a couple of years of deep depression, feeling like I hadn't performed for the label and I didn't become this world famous thing that everybody thought I was. So when I was picking myself up from underneath of this feeling of the weight of having disappointed everybody around me, and including myself, and that maybe I wasn't going to be the household name famous guy that I thought I was going to be. If you're going to decide to see your life as a success, you're going to have to start moving the goalposts a bit and redefining what it is to be successful. And I think that the piece we're talking about here, this sense that what I do helps me derive a deep sense of purpose and self-value, all of a sudden, okay, so Hawksley Workman did not become a millionaire, did not have that record that everybody thought I was going to have, that was going to put me into the upper stratosphere of irreconcilable stardom that was going to last forever and make me uber wealthy. So if that was my definition of success and that's not coming, then what am I going to do now to redefine success so I don't feel like a piece of shit all the time? And part of that is when I get on stage to have that, when I get given that opportunity to be in front of a full room of people and to create that atmosphere with those people, to have that show, to get to engage with those feelings of value, it doesn't matter that I never made the big bucks. It doesn't matter. I feel like an important artist. In fact, I feel like more these days like an important artist, because in the streaming era, kids, I think, are feeling more and more like they can't be authentic. They got to go and copy something that has some success in order that maybe if they copy a thing that's working, maybe it'll work for them. The algorithm is a very unloving, uncaring existence. Like if I didn't get on the radio in a certain market, if the Bear in Edmonton wasn't going to play me, my management could get on the phone with the fucking Bear and go, hey, what happened? You played the shit out of Striptease. Why aren't you playing this next single? There's no such phone call in the era of the algorithm. The algorithm is it's an anti-human force in our lives that is, we're going to have to understand and reconcile. And I think we're going to have to understand and reconcile more as the nature of work changes with AI. And when AI starts to move into more deeply felt spaces, the jobs issue is going to start also turning into a crisis of meaning. I think we're going to start to feel and see, not only is there not going to be enough work so that everybody can pay their bills succinctly, but I think that work, the thing that for 2,000 years, let's say, we sort of had a natural way to derive some sort of meaning for our lives by, we'd go to work and put in our time and it was appreciated and we were paid for it. And voila, all of a sudden you've got a loop of cycle of that you can create meaning for yourself. But that's going away in and of itself. And if there's something I find that I'm thinking about an awful lot as modernity sort of crunches in a way that I don't think we're going to be able to avoid, I think the AI piece in work and that the crisis in meaning is going to be something that we're really going to struggle with moving forward. Because I don't think we've never, if we're going to have to predicate human understanding of our own value systems on a system that doesn't have my work has a value that's contained in money, and I'm given this money as a store of value for later because I gave you 6 hours of my labor out in the field or whatever it is. We've predicated our whole understanding of why we get up in the morning based on a system that may in fact be disappearing as our labor and even the benign aspects of our intellectuality is replaced by AI. It's going to be very fascinating. And I don't like to use the word scary. We use that word too easily, especially for things that are usually not scary. But it's definitely concerning. It's very concerning. And it's not concerning from a creative point of view. Like, I'm not thinking like, oh shit, AI is going to take my job as a songwriter. I mean, AI is never going to do what I can do on stage. It's just what I do on stage is so heavily predicated on my humanity. That's just one thing AI is not going to be able to take away. I don't think AI can write a song where you can say, you can't make, you cannot make money, but you can't make time. Like I've seen people when in the early days of ChatGPT say, look, I can tell it to write a song like Hawksley Workman. And then they, hey, ChatGPT, write a song like Hawksley Workman. It spits out lyrics. And it's like, yeah, not even close. Like, I don't think I'm entirely in the clear, but I think that what I get to do when I'm on stage, I'm just not sure without some sort of like computer implant in our brain. I'm just not sure how that gets replaced,
This idea of a meaning crisis, I agree. And it brings the same alarms that you're saying that you're right, not scary, but this is alarming. But I'm not just saying this because you're my guest and I want to be polite, but I go to things like this concert in Sherwood Park that you had, and then it just reinvigorates me that no, you can't replace Hawksley Workman or whomever on the stage, putting on this performance that it's like human interaction. And if anything, we need more Hawksley Workmans getting up on the stages as AI comes in more and we don't have these human interactions. Like your concerts are, it feels collaborative, even with the audience. And another couple, before we were talking, we were chit-chatting about that Sher Park show. We've gone to multiple shows of yours in Edmonton. This time, though, they brought their 14-year-old daughter, or son, and 11-year-old or 10-year-old daughter. The 14-year-old is, internet and music is like getting created on AI. And yeah, begrudgingly, I think they went a little bit because, they're going out with mom and dad. But both of them just loved it and was chatting with them after in the little foyer. And they were just like ecstatic. And I think you bring this performance that AI and the internet can never give. So much so they went and bought a couple t-shirts on your stand. And I think that's Jennifer to give them a free poster and they were over the moon. That human connection, we're going to need more. The work you're doing and others.
Well, I appreciate that. I think I'm a part of it, Sean, but I think that really there was an interesting quote from the bass player her name's Kim Deal, I think, and she was in Sonic Youth. And she has this quote that I read that musicians were talking about a couple years ago. And something like people buy tickets to see me play because they want to see somebody believe in themselves, which could boil down in a way that you could take some offense to that. Like, well, what the fuck do you mean I don't believe in myself? But what I think is happening is I sit there or I stand on stage as a reminder of the human depth that is literally always at our disposal. You can have a spiritual experience within the context of your own internal mechanism, all on your own if you want, through meditation, through all different kinds of means. Like I'm just there in a way as a placeholder to remind you I can go deeper with myself. I can go deeper with my wife. I can go deeper with my family. I can be more real. I'm not saying I'm some guru and I'm giving you this information. All I'm there to do is to remind you your spirit is reawakened. My spirit is reawakened in those moments too. That's what I mean. I've been able to undo and mitigate a lot of that negative self-talk because over the years, I've leaned more heavily into the trust of the situation that I find myself in. Here I am at Sherwood Park with an opportunity to share my gifts and to have this collaborative experience take place with me and the audience. It's a gift from the heavens. I talk out loud about because I never, ever, ever want to take it for granted. But all I feel like I'm doing for the audience in some ways is just sitting there as a placeholder and a reminder that going to those depths, going to those remarkable places is an achievement of wonder and human potential. If you do it with your wife, you do it with your kids, you do it with your community, you do it with your coworkers, going to the depths in your humanity is always worth it. It's always worth it. Whether you go through those hurting times, you go through those sad times. I was even thinking the other day, because I have friends that are, I'm that age where now I know people whose wives are going through cancer and stuff like this. And it's like, fuck me. Like, I don't really want to go through another, like, I don't want to get served up a sad or arduous, difficult year. I don't want to see a family member or a friend go through sickness, right? But it's going to happen. And it's with the grace that we can manage those things that we learn over time that in those negative or difficult, arduous experiences, more humanity is generated than less. Like you can find your grace in that place. Nobody wants it, but when it comes, you have to have that grace to stand with that darkness, like you stood as equally willing in the light, like that stuff is part of the package, the human package.
With this journey and this human package you speak of, not just yourself, but what role do you think art and music plays in helping us get through these times, helping us sit through the dark and in the light?
Well, I mean, look, the Greeks knew that they like to sit around and listen to stories. And all of a sudden, they thought it was even better if those stories could be acted out by people on a stage or around a dinner table. And then all of a sudden, over 2,000 years ago, it's sort of minted in the culture of an advanced human species that we're a narrative species. We love story, and we are able to predicate our own self-understanding on story. We're allowed to see through into our dreaming through story, and that story piece is just never going away. Like sometimes when I listen to theater people talk about how are we going to get more people in the theater, it's like the crazy thing is that everybody's sitting at home watching Netflix, which is just theater on TV. How did this happen that we still are the Greeks who want to fucking have dinner and then go enjoy a story? And so that doesn't seem to be going anywhere anytime soon. So as narrative species, we know that we can attach and create meaning and understanding for our lives when we attach, even if you are somebody who only believes in coincidence, that your coincidence all adds up to meaning, because through rapid fire coincidences, you're able to somehow extract some sort of self-understanding. I'm not really a believer in coincidence, but I do sort of feel that we are given those opportunities to bulk up on our learning. In fact, I was just having this discussion with a buddy of mine at the gym the other day. We were talking about parenting. And now, of course, I'm not a parent. Sometimes I find myself being very highly critical of parents. I feel like I already stuck my foot in my mouth once with the whole fucking iPad on the headrest.
No, you didn't. No.
I'm just being a jokester. But I will say that sometimes, as a Gen Xer, I was provided with some resistance in the parenting that I had. And I remember seeing this sort of child psychologist talk about the resistance that you parents provide their kids is the same type of thing that people who are looking to build muscle go to the gym to find resistance. And then you push against that resistance and you create strength. That is the human story right there. We're looking for opportunities to push against resistance, because pushing against resistance creates strength. And when you create strength, you create opportunities for yourself to operate more effectively in every situation. More strength, more effective operation. And I sort of feel that that's the art piece, the arts and culture piece. That's why I'm in the gym 6 days a week, pushing against that pressure, because I want to be effective in all situations. I want to be effective in my physical life. I want to be able to unscrew the sticky top off a jam jar. I want to be able to undo the sticky top off my own internal jam jars of, sadness and disappointment, or eurekas and gratitude and extreme positivity. You name it. I want to live effectively, and I think that also goes back to the money piece. Again, identifying that wealth is more about frugality and living within your means than it is about a dollar figure. You can be a millionaire and not be wealthy. That's really up to you. The spending habits of the individual create your economic bias. I feel like the happier you are internally, the less likely you are to go and retail therapy. Like we all do it. I've bought stuff thinking, man, this is going to make me into the exact person I want to be. But we all know if you're cognizant and you're watching your insides, you can see that a large purchase that you thought was going to make you happy, it almost never does. Any car that I bought that I thought, man, it's going to be so fun to own a new car, I'm bored of that car after not that long. I'm bored of the newer, bigger TV that we bought, thinking we need a newer, bigger TV. All of a sudden, it's just another TV. I can't tell. I don't remember what it was like watching a 40-something inch TV. Now I got a 65-inch TV. I don't remember there being much difference. I can't tell. It's just the TV now. So if you can start to really make these value judgments on, does the thing I buy really derive any happiness? I'm looking at what it feels like we're going to be moving into very difficult times in the Canadian economy. And I had tried on this Lacoste, like sports, like kind of like I was like, fuck, I love this Lacoste thing. And I was like, but it's ridiculous. I can't bring myself to even the idea of buying it. But sure enough, Christmas kind of wraps up and I'm back online. I really want that Lacoste jacket. Like, I'm going to go get it. But I went through a 2-week-long internal dialogue about this fucking Lacoste jacket, because it became an archetype. It's like, okay, meanwhile, I'm telling my friends and family, hey, probably a good time to be arming yourself with a little extra money around, because I think we're going to be going through some difficult times. And then there's the other side of me. You're going to need that Lacoste jacket. Boy, that Lacoste jacket's going to make you into the rock star you think you should be. And it took me 2 weeks to undo the tentacles of this fucking Lacoste jacket, because it's like, this jacket it's going to come in the mail. You're going to wear it. And then what? Then it's over. Then the thrill, there was never any identity ever going to be created by this purchase. So go and invest in the things that create meaning in your self-identity. This Lacoste jacket was unnecessary. And thank God I never bought it, because really the louder voice in me is preserve my freedom, preserve my freedom. Way louder than, hey, you need a Lacoste jacket. When the big energy walks into the room in my own internal architecture, that big energy says freedom first. Freedom, freedom, freedom first. Freedom before owning anything.
I feel like you encapsulated this conversation of preserve my freedom. And I didn't know what we were going to get into here, but this idea is so profound to me, is preserving that freedom, that self-identity, knowing thyself, all these themes that you've been talking about. And because it's hard, whether it's the Lacoste jacket, which maybe I know you play in Europe, maybe the Europeans would have liked it. I think that's a very European soccer bomber,
Yeah, exactly.
but at what cost? At your freedom? In this case, you say no. I think that's such a good message coming here. Now, I'm super curious though. You seem to really have, of course, it hasn't probably been linear to find this freedom. What does freedom mean to Hawksley? How do you stay true to yourself? We've talked a lot about stories. I'm also very interested in our money stories, especially from when we were growing up. What was the story? You talked about meaning and attachment. What was the story? What meaning did you attach to money growing up in your household? And this could have been direct or indirectly, things that you just came up with on your own.
Well, I'll out myself to say that I was always very fascinated by money. My parents had my brother and I working for an allowance from as far back as I can remember. I feel like we worked out a deal when I was in kindergarten that I would be working for 25 cents a week with a mind that I was going to save up for a bicycle. So in kindergarten, it meant feeding the dog, making my bed, like stuff that you're going to do anyways when you're a kid, but now there was a price attached to it. My mom had a hair salon in our house. So there was a business in our house, and my grandma also had a hair salon in her house. So there was two generations of women who ran businesses out of their homes. So in my own mind, I saw that, oh, you could work for yourself and it could happen from your house. Already some of like the fundamental features are, hey, my dad was somebody who went to work and took any amount of overtime that was on offer. He would cash his paychecks and he would lay the money out. And sometimes my brother and I would look at the money, like we would look at the brown $100 bills, and they kind of glowed with a certain kind of energy, and the red 50s with the old 50s with that circle of RCMP, that picture, like there was a lot of heat coming off those red ones. And I just remember being a kid thinking, man, like, because there was a business in our house, and my parents also, though, coming from the 1970s and 80s, they had a 14% mortgage on their house. They also were that first generation that had to deal with credit cards and credit. And I think that a lot of that era of baby boomers got into a lot of spending problems because nobody really taught them how to deal with credit. And I feel like my parents ran into some spending problems only because they weren't properly educated when credit cards and credit and consumerism started to sort of take on it played a different role, I think, in the 1980s. And I know that my parents spent in some ways more than they made, and they were people with good jobs, but I just think they weren't properly educated with how to operate within the context of the freedom that's on offer from credit is dangerous stuff. Like you have to be very, very careful with that. And I think that there was just a generation of parents in the 80s that let things kind of get out of hand only because there was just no education around that. And then combine that with the fact that you had a 14% mortgage that, you were paying. And we had our powdered milk years, just like lots of kids in the 80s had, whose parents had effectively good jobs, but maybe the odd spending problem or just, inflation crunch that was happening in the late 70s through the early 80s. So all of that is formative for me. Having a mom with a business being run in our house, having a dad who often put work ahead of coming home early. Like my dad he worked for Bell Canada, climbing telephone poles and fixing telephone lines. And my dad was a very hard worker. So we grew up in a narrative of hard work wins the day. I started to practice hours and hours a day from about 10 years old. I feel like that was also part of that narrative. I feel like I was being raised for a meritocratic universe where I saw that my parents worked hard. My mom was an excellent hairdresser. She was one of the best. a lot of young people would come to our house to get their hair done because my mom was young and kept like, it's like, hey, if you want a hairdo like Howard Jones, you got to go to Beverly Hawksley's place because that's where you get it. If you want a hairdo like Daryl Hall, you got to go to Beverly Hawksley. She knows how to do that stuff, you know? So I grew up in a youth driven house where there was the cognizance of the economic reality was very front and center because there was business going on in our house. You know, my mom could be hollering at my brother and I to go clean up our Legos, but if that phone rang and my mom was answering for a potential client on the other end, like she could, hello, Beverly's hairstyling. And like we lived in a house where we were very cognizant of the power of the business, the family business. I also run a family business. And it's for Jennifer and I, we know every cog, we know every closet, we know everything about how our little business runs. We're passionate about it. Our business creates that freedom we keep talking about. It's the same thing that I watched my parents, and I watched how some of their bad financial decisions took away their freedom. And my brother and I both saw that up close. You know, they were lucky because they kind of could go with their tail between their legs to one of my grandparents and say, hey, can you help us out? Because we got ourselves into some trouble here. I think all that stuff, my brother and I were very keen to watch. And I think also having had allowance from such a young age, like, and my parents were brutal with that allowance thing. Like, if it'd be like, Mom, can we have this thing? It's like, well, you can spend your own money on it, or you can keep saving for the thing you want. It took me 2 years to save up for a bicycle. And that by the time I was in grade 2 and I'd saved up for my bicycle, my allowance, I think, was about $2 a week. And it took me another 2 years to save up for a computer. And so when I was like grade 5, grade 6, I had a computer and I taught myself to program in basic language. And my parents were they weren't coming in to buy us stuff or save the day. Like my brother and I were very, very stricken we were carrying our own weight in some ways as kids. If you wanted a guitar, you're going to save up and buy the guitar. If you wanted the computer, you're going to save up and buy the computer. There wasn't, outside of Christmas, which was lavish, let's be honest. Outside of Christmas, there really was like we were on our own to spend our own money in the ways that we thought was going to make sense to us. So all of that leads me to, I started to invest when I was in high school because I thought, well, I started to buy mutual funds because I was like, I know I'm going to have some lean years in Toronto when I finally get there. I was cognizant of that. I was 17 and I was like, yeah, like I'm going to need to have money sitting somewhere. At this point, I was teaching about 20 to 25 students a week, music lessons. I was making a lot of money in high school teaching lessons. And in some ways, it's why I stopped going to classes. I effectively dropped out of high school because my own career, the career that I knew I was working towards from about 10 years old, was already starting to take shape. And I already knew that school felt useless to me. I was like, okay, well, I'm already making a living wage here as a 17-year-old kid with the music lessons. And I was a snarky little asshole teenager who said, well, screw going to school. I mean, again, I was still friends with all the teachers. In fact, I taught a lot of their kids piano and guitar and drums, but I stopped going to the classes because for me, I was already in my life as I had imagined it working itself out. And in some ways that was predicated on a financial stability that was created then. As a teenager, all of a sudden I was able to buy mutual funds. So when I moved to Toronto for my lean years, which was about 4 or 5 very lean years, I could live off of some of my investments. They weren't huge, but it was when in the 90s in Toronto, I was paying $200 a month to live in a shithole full of bugs. And so we were living very, very close to the bone back then. So it didn't need a whole lot of money in order to make it work. I feel for young artists who move to cities nowadays where I don't know if bug infested holes are still available. I'm not sure if that's a thing in cities anymore, but anybody who was trying to become a musician back in the day when I was young and starting out, you knew you were signing up to live in some horrible place for at least a little while you figured your stuff out. So that's kind of the money journey, I feel like, for me. And then almost purposely to like bolster the artist brand, I didn't have access to my own bank account for about 10 years. I was like, oh, I don't want to be that guy who sees my money. And I played that role of, I'm just an artiste after all. And I'm sure it's all going to work out in the end. I'm not somebody who needs to bother myself with that. But after the Universal Records thing didn't pan out properly, after it felt like my career was definitely in a it could work or it might disappear forever place, I became very stricken with the want to make sure that basically this life I'd worked towards since I was a kid, that I was going to be able to maintain it, because I could feel like it was maybe going to go away. And that was terrifying because I didn't go to university. I didn't have anything to fall back. I'm very much a plan A only type person, like don't have a plan B, because if you have a plan B, there's some chance of you falling back onto it. And if you're going to attempt to be an artist, I would highly recommend failure over a plan B, because it's that kind of absolutism that creates better artistic work, in my opinion. Which isn't to say that you can't have comfort. I'm just saying that if you give yourself an out sometimes as a human, you'll take that out. Because sometimes that the Sisyphean nature of any like highly any endeavor that requires a huge amount of investment, you do wake up the next morning and the rock is at the bottom of the hill and you're going to have to push it up again. That means that the money isn't going to drive you to keep pushing that rock up that hill. The meaning piece is going to keep you pushing that rock up that hill.
And when you speak of this meaning, I feel like that's another thing that has been circling this conversation. When you talk about leaving school, Carl Jung is a great psychotherapist. He talks about this individuation. So the process that someone individuates and becomes themselves. Whether it's when you decide to leave school, to go to Toronto, be self-sufficient, you're invested in mutual funds, you're making money, who knows? But it seems like there's been this evolution of this becoming Hawksley, knowing Hawksley, which when that boulder gets to the bottom of the hill, I think it's when we know ourselves, who we are, then we have the resilience to push that up. And I feel like a message that I keep hearing today is that process is so important. It's not a process we want to skip over. It's knowing oneself, individuating, knowing what true art or music, like what resonates with our soul, so that when the tough times come, we can draw on that and push that damn boulder up the hill.
Totally agree, Sean. I think that even doing this interview today with you, and like I said, I'm talking about stuff I've never talked about, literally in an interview. I've never talked about finances ever. But even just kind of going through the spirituality of that financial picture, like there's someone inextricably connected. And even hearing things come out of my own mouth today, I'm like, wow, like I've never really had the opportunity to speak out loud about this stuff. And in some ways, I don't know if it would be a turnoff to people or not, but I have young artists that I help out in some ways or other, like not, it's nothing heroic that I do. Like there's young artists in my town that come over for coffees or will write and hang out in my studio. And I had a young artist the other day talk about how they have a wish to be financially stable. And he was embarrassed to bring it up with me. And it's a young person. He's in his early 30s. And I said, man, I think it's an excellent thing you're talking about. And he's a great artist as well. He's a great visual artist. He's a great musician. And he's just in that place where he can see that there's an encroachment on freedom, his freedom to be an artist, when he is in a place of struggle. So all of a sudden, he's trying to figure out through his, through the ways he's able to create an income, can he make an income where he can create a bit on the side, and over time, through socking it away, saving and investing, can he be that artist who he can wake up or go to sleep at night feeling calm that there's a soft place to land? And he was embarrassed to bring it up, which is, it makes sense to me because this is too big, Sean. The 1960s created an archetype for the popular artist, which was you were supposed to look like somebody who'd come from the gutter. You were only going to be taken seriously if you had come from extreme poverty or extreme situation somewhere or the other. And in some ways, we were like led to believe that great artists couldn't come from anything other than some kind of a serious abject situation. And that's just not true. I think in some ways, hip hop kind of reinvigorated the idea that they could sing about the want for self success, you could sing about money. You could sing, again, it could come across as glib to some people. For me, what I loved was the duality that was put forward within the structure of popular thinking, which is since Bob Dylan, we were under the impression that you had to be a disheveled guy who looked like he never combed his hair and wore clothes that only came from the Sally Ann. And then popular culture gave us a new, and almost, I didn't see this coming, but now there was a new popular narrative, which was a very consumer-driven narrative, which flew entirely into the face of everything that I grew up valuing and believing. Look, I'm not standing up for one side or the other. I don't have a horse in the race. I'm just saying that it's interesting when you see the undulations of popular culture. So my parents grew up with a sense that artists came from the gutter and wore ill-fitting, disheveled clothes. And then a couple generations later, you turn on the TV and there's videos promoting conspicuous consumption. And it's like, whoa, 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 what happened here? And all of this under the auspices of popular culture thinking. So there was when I start to try and understand the duality in that brand analysis, all coming from popular culture, it's pretty interesting stuff. But it does call into question the archetypal narrative piece of money and the culture creators and who makes it and how we're supposed to reconcile money in front of our audiences or something. It's an undeveloped thought, Sean, only because I don't really get to talk about this stuff out loud. It's more like a salon we're having where I'm hearing some of these thoughts crystallize out of my mouth for the first time. So they may sound somewhat ineloquent, some of the things I'm saying, but this is going around in my mind all the time. This is more or less what I'm thinking about all of the time. I'm watching, because market economics is very interesting to me. Like, I am fanatical for Kijiji and Facebook Marketplace because I like the marketplace. I like trade. My dad always had something in our yard that was for sale. My dad was always having a lawn sale and doing a cash deal for a canoe that's sitting in our yard or something like that. I like small talk. My dad was a small talk genius. So my dad could, just by virtue of operating in a marketplace, you could meet friends, you can meet interesting, clever people that can help you create a divergence in your life. All the friends I have in Peterborough, which is where I currently live, I met through Facebook Marketplace, because it's like, who could possibly be selling this weird, rare microphone? I'm going to go buy it just so I can meet whatever crazy person owns this thing. And it works every single time because of the niche-oriented nature of that universe, of that market universe. I can all of a sudden way more easily find people that are exactly like me because the market creates this extraordinary subgenre of niche events. And as you know, I listen to a lot of side hustle type podcasts. And one of my favorite little aphorisms is the riches are in the niches. You know what I mean? And it's like, I would even say that the social riches are in the niches, and any niche that I am able to ingratiate myself to within the Facebook market community, man, if I'm looking for something weird, I don't even know what the other. Oh, I was looking for one of those when your parents get older and they can't do the stairs anymore, and that chairlift thing. Their case, and I was like, man, there must be a lot of those on Facebook Marketplace because they get bought from a member of the family that is only going to probably be alive for another couple of years, and there's tons of them on Marketplace. And to me, that's an economic indicator. It's a piece of the economic narrative that I wouldn't have had any reason to understand other than, oh yeah, these sort of medical beds and this type of stuff gets bought at full price by somebody. It's only needed for a short while, and then they're looking to get rid of it. And for me, this is part of an economic narrative that speaks volumes about how and why the culture works. And to me, it's every bit as important as anything cultural or artistic. I find that having a sharp peripheral and a want, interesting people are interested in everything. That's what I find out. At the end of the day, if you're interested or interesting, there's a good chance you want to know about all kinds of stuff, way beyond your own modality.
I have yet to hear people having Facebook Marketplace hangouts, but that is great. And why I'm interested in musicians and artists is I am not a musician. Both my brothers are. I was the hockey guy and could make the NHL, and the business guy.
Oh,
And I didn't make the NHL, just in case you're wondering. But I was interested in this freedom that I felt in artists. My brother's still an artist, and him and his wife live a frugal life, but it just seems full of this richness that this business world kind of forgot about. I just think there's such a opportunity to marriage, just these conversations, help people open our lens to different ways of being, and perhaps give us the insight there's alternative ways. And I was saying that because of your interesting comment about interesting people. So I'm always been interested in artists and this richness that they bring to life through art of some form. That was an unprocessed thought. So there's one back to you.
Oh, I get it. I get it. I mean, hearing just the story, just the way you just talked about your brother's existence makes a lot of sense. That frugality piece, there's wealth in frugality. I mean, it's just right there. It's so easy in a way, but I mean, Big Corp they would never make their quarterly earnings if they weren't heavily reliant on humans feeling like they needed to buy stuff in order to make themselves happier, healthier, more succinct. It's the age old thing. You watch the television commercial and it basically says, hey, you've got a problem and we're the company with a product here to solve the problem that you've got. That commercial is never saying, hey, you're a full and rich person internally who's got your shit figured out. And we're just hoping that maybe this is the shampoo that a person who's got this rich, full life going on internally is going to hopefully want to buy. Like, the whole idea is, if we can trick you into believing you're having a degraded experience, then maybe we can sell you something to make you feel like that degraded experience can be enhanced somehow or other. If your own inner life is rich, none of that narrative touches you. None of that narrative touches you. You just look at it and see the absurdity for what it is and see that it's a game being played. And some people join that game and some people don't join that game. It's a long life of learning. And if you're open to learning, like, I'd even say that's another thing I've been saying to some young artists, because I feel like I hit my income potential. I feel like it plateaued like 15 years ago. And I sort of make about the same amount of money as I've made for that amount of time. And so sometimes I get offered a gig. Hey, do you want to do this gig? And it's like, what's the dollar on it? It's like, yeah, money's not great. But sometimes if I'm offered an opportunity within the context of this project, well, there's going to be a lot of learning. Like, I did a show at the Citadel Theater in your town in Edmonton. And it was one of the first times I'd ever composed for a musical. So I'd never composed for a musical before. And then Daryl at the Citadel was like, I'm going to hire you to do this. And, the money was nothing to write home about. No offense to me or Daryl for whatever. This is just the reality. What I said to Jenny when we were looking at whether I was going to do this gig or not, it was like, but man, I've been wanting to learn this music composition software for months and I'll never just go do it on my own. I would never, I'm going to go and open up the manual and figure out how to do it. So what I did was I took this gig because I was like, I am going to be forced to learn this software if I take this gig, and being forced to learn the software is how I'm going to learn it. So I looked at, okay, the dollar figure is fine, but the added bonus is this huge learning curve I'm going to be able to absorb while I do this job. And it didn't mean that I was doing it wasn't like I was phoning in poor work or anything. It's just that it gave me a chance and a reason to push myself to learn something. I feel like that has become, again, that's the internal piece. If I'm going to make only a certain amount of money and every year, more or less, based on the kind of work that I'm normally doing, sometimes I will get that feeling of, man, am I ever a success? If with that small amount of payment up front comes an abundance of learning and new wisdom. For me, that you got to figure that stuff in. One of my friends who I met through Kijiji here in town, his name is Jeremiah Brown. Somebody you should probably talk to. Another very, very smart money guy who won a silver medal in rowing at the London Olympics. And he and I talk about everything you and I are talking about. He's one of the only people who I have a regular dialogue about this stuff, because he's asking all the same questions about merit and value. You win your silver medal at the end of the Olympics. It's not like music where I'm a 50-year-old guy who's funny looking and people still want to hear me play. Like, he wins a silver medal, he gets older, and he gets booted out of professional sport, as anybody in professional sport does. So then you have a whole new crisis of meaning. You've got these people, hockey play. I look at these people and think, man, athletes really have it. Like, when the NHL spits you out, they really spit you out. I know some Olympic athletes too. The same thing. Once pro sports spits you out, redefining yourself becomes the whole picture of your life. Because for anybody that engages anything with a high level of excellence, it takes up the entirety of who you are. For me, Hawksley Workman is the entirety of who I am a lot of the times. And that's because I want to operate at such a high level of excellence that it needs to be fully absorbing. And now I get to be a funny looking 50-year-old person and still sell out Sherwood Park. But my buddies from pro sport, their thing has to be redefined at a whole new level for them because they were going through the whole hockey thing. They were U8 and U7 hockey kids, and then they were getting up early 5 a.m. and they were dragging their own bag into hockey, and then they were wearing a sports coat at their practices. And all of a sudden, there's a 20-year narrative that they got to redesign their lives. But the wonder of full absorption, full passion to do anything at a high level of excellence. To me, this is my obsession. I love my buddy Jeremiah, my rower buddy, because he's obsessed with wanting to be great at things. And even if I'm just going to show up and be a half-ass something or other, like if I'm going to play pickup hockey down at the rink and wear a leather jacket and a beret and look like a total art goof, I'm still out there fighting. I'm the lowest level skill, but I'm playing at it with a passion that belies what it is I'm physically capable of because I love living at the height of existence. I love when things are wonderful. You know what I mean? I just love when things are great. And when people are operating at the want to be great, it just makes me so fucking excited. I think this idea of the individuation, to me, I'm obsessed with, my dark years were misanthropic years where I saw humanity bad, people are bad. Oh God, I'm part of the bad humanity. I've undone that thinking. Humans, especially when you interact with them as individuals, are often extraordinary. Like I've fallen back in love with humans again, especially when you get to see them one-on-one. Like the guy who picks up my snowblower and replaces the belt. He's got a homemade trailer. He comes by, he picks it up, he brings it back a few days later repaired. Like, it's like, who is this guy? When did this guy decide to become this guy and to do this, offer this service at such a high level that the enhancement he offers my life allows me to have a fuller, richer experience? Like, who are these people? Who are these individuals that decided to take the path less traveled? That he was going to just build his own trailer out of plywood, and he was going to be somebody who picked up broken snowblowers and fix them and then take them back. It's just like, give me the individual. Give me somebody weird who's doing something weird and extraordinary. I got all the time in the world for this type of human.
That type of human, it speaks to me. It's that person who is self-acceptant. They accept who they are, and it allows them to use your words, to be great at whatever it's doing. A couple days ago, our furnace wasn't working. I found this guy who was referred to me. He was the nicest guy in the world. Got down under the floor. He's fixing it all up and he's teaching me all about it. I'm like, man, I kind of want to like furnaces now. This guy makes furnaces seem so cool and sexy. And he was just great at what he did, but he wasn't dragging his feet coming in there. And anyhow, he seemed like he was comfortable in his skin to wear a leather jacket at a hockey game or whatever it is. I know I'm attracted to people who are themselves, whatever it is. I'm like, that is a gift. That is a rich life.
I agree, Sean. It is a gift.
All of this conversation around knowing ourselves, freedom, being great. What would you say your relationship with money is right now?
Great question. I feel like I'm somewhat obsessively interacting with the concept of money right now. And that's just because I'm trying to read the writing on the walls in the greater economic picture in Canada. And I'm looking at as many indicators as I possibly can to try and to create some understanding of what I think may be happening. So I'm looking at money in a way. I'm engaging with ideas of scarcity, of being afraid that maybe money won't be there, because I'm seeing that I think we're going to go through a time of economic hardship, and I'm trying to understand if there's a way that I can sort myself out, if I can play the game cleverly, if maybe I can mitigate some of what I think is going to be the discomfort over the next number of years. And so I'm looking at money a lot. I'm thinking of myself as a taxpayer as I see the deficits that have been created federally, the money that gets handed over for the sake of wars and other things. I'm looking at money and thinking about the role it's playing in society and culture at the moment. We've gone through a time where in real estate and investing, where you didn't have to be a genius to be doing well, you know? Like, if you were in the property market over the last 25 years, there's a good chance you were able to swing up and up and up and up the ladder. If you were investing over the last 20, 25 years, you enjoyed a bull market that looked like it was never going to end. So there's things happening on the ground. I think we can see that there's going to be some turbulence in the job market. If there's some speculation on what's going to happen with tariffs coming, but also even before tariffs, there was already issues, I think, in the Canadian job atmosphere, in the way that we sort of organize ourselves. It's different than what I remember when I was a kid. And so I'm looking at money a lot like that because I'm trying to understand what it means for the country right now, because I feel like the economic piece is a big part of the narrative that's happening. It's a big part of the narrative piece of where Canada's at the moment. I don't know if you would agree with that or not, but so I'm looking at stuff like, I like cars. My dad was a car guy. So even though I am very strict, we have strict policy of being a one car family, and I have a strict policy of like driving the car I currently own into the ground and not ever having a car payment. It doesn't mean that I'm not always looking at cars. I love cars, very interested in cars. And I think that the car market has been very interesting to watch through the pandemic. And then it's sort of recoiling heavily right now. And I feel that as a market indicator is very interesting to me. Real estate's always been very interesting to me because, you know, as a Gen Xer and a Canadian, like Australia, the entirety of our economy is in some ways predicated on a real estate obsession. And I think Canadians have that. We're married into this real estate obsession. I think that we're about to witness the real estate miracle that we've all enjoyed the last 20 or 25 years as it's going to turn dark. I think we're not going to understand exactly what real estate. I think it's going to go through fluctuations that don't make sense to us, and I think it's going to go through those fluctuations for a long enough time. It's going to be uncomfortable. That's my sense. So yeah, I'm looking at money a lot. I'm looking at my own situation, but mostly I'm trying to understand. We're about to move into a new environment with money and feeling of wealth and prosperity, I think, in Canada, and I think we as a country are going to come together and try to figure out how to redefine ourselves, possibly without the unmitigated prosperity piece that has we've sort of co-branded with the last 25 years or so. Does that make sense to you? And do I sound insane?
No, not at all. Not at all. I think this last part about redefining ourselves is a big conversation that's been threaded throughout this conversation. And there seems to be, as you're saying, turbulent times ahead. And I think our conversation around stories and the stories we tell ourselves, we tell ourselves stories about things, and sometimes we're a little hard on ourselves. But like you're talking about, the reality is there could be some dark times ahead. And I think redefining ourselves back to who we are can be a way to see this through.
Yeah, like, this Christmas, I really enjoyed this Christmas. And again, like, it wasn't like we spent huge amounts of money, but my mom and her guy came, and I really enjoyed the food Jenny was making. And quite honestly, like, I felt like it could just be some of the algorithms I engage with, but my sense is I felt like I was a part of still a prosperous economy this Christmas. I'm not sure that next Christmas I'm going to get to feel like that. I know that sounds totally bizarre and maybe outlandish. And maybe people are listening to this going, oh, I didn't think this guy would think like this, and now I don't like him. But I was really enjoying Christmas this year because I thought to myself, I have this sense that we might not be circled by an external feeling of prosperity next Christmas. This isn't to say that you can't foster prosperity inside yourself. I never let myself move into these feelings of being so stricken by fear. Oh my God, they're saying it might in fact be a depression, not a recession this time. And what does that even mean? And I won't allow myself to fall down that well and scream as I fall into the darkness. Like the old version of myself, this isn't to say that I'm somehow like I have some opaque resistance to fear. It's just that we're all in this together, and whatever version of the economy, if things get bleak to a point, like historically bleak, we're all going to be in this together somehow or other anyways. And we're all going to have to be forced into value propositions that, well, if there's no money, I think about the way my grandma talked about the Depression, and fuck, if you were to listen to my grandma tell stories, it almost sounded like the Depression was her favorite time of her life. You know what I mean? Now, granted, she was a child, and when you're a kid, being a kid's great. But she was a kid in the Depression. And my sense of when she talks about the Depression is when there's no money, all that's left is the stuff that's really, truly valuable. Your family, your community, your church, singing together, listening to the radio. The shit that my grandma sounds like it was really the essence of what was the spark of her life. And all that stuff happens when there's nothing, when there is no commercial infringement in your life. Nobody can afford to buy anything. Therefore, we're really going to enjoy one another. I don't know.
Very interesting you say that. My 90-year-old grandma is visiting from Nanaimo, BC. And 2 days ago, we were just chatting. She was having her clam and beer. And she's a happy, happy lady. Playing cards till 12 a.m. for clams and beers. But, because this is on my mind, money and like wellness and happiness. And I was like, hey, grandma, I was talking to her about AI because she does Facebook and stuff like that. And she's like, no, I don't really know about much about AI. And I said, what do you think about, this tariff talk, blah, blah, blah. She's like, you know what? I was in the Depression and it was a pretty good time, is exactly what she said. Then my mom's like, well, Ray, her husband, he wasn't feeling it was a good time. She's like, yeah, oh yeah, that's right. But she's like, I think it'll be okay, is what she said. So if my 90-year-old grandma has any wisdom, she said it's going to be okay. Take a sip of that beer and clam.
Yeah, I mean, good for her, man. That's so great. I mean, I don't know. I feel like there are people around me I'm lucky to have. My buddy Jeremiah, the Olympian, he and I can sort of talk about money and what's happening in the world in a way that I feel like I'm not going to be judged or be criticized. There's a lot going on right now. There's a lot going on. And in some ways people are being encouraged to follow the thinking habits of tribes and to not deviate from what the tribe is sort of created in terms of boundaries of allowance for what you're allowed to talk about and discuss. And like, I find, again, that it personally infringes on what I see as like thought freedom, which is how are we ever supposed as adults to arrive at any further understanding if all of a sudden there's these bizarre no-go areas within conversation? Like, it's just, being a Gen Xer, that it just doesn't blend with my understanding of how life works, but I definitely feel right now that we're up against insidious forces that don't make sense to me. They seem not human, or certainly not to benefit humans. And I'm very interested in what benefits humans at the moment. And for whatever that means, that's kind of a focus. Because I think that we're sitting on the precipice if AI and the promise of AI, and, we grew up on science fiction, and so I think we can put together what AI, the possibilities are. And I think our fear of it and our want to have some understanding that our humanity is not going to be overly infringed upon by this AI unit that's somehow here, seemingly never going to go away. Humans don't move in reverse. We only know how to move forward. So I know there's a lot of my friends like have that Luddite want to like, well, all we need to do is just go back. And I'm like, that's just not really, the human organism isn't really wired to do that. We are a forward-looking species. And somehow I sort of feel like we need to find our fortunes in the future. Not to say that there isn't stuff in history that we can't derive and glean wisdom from. Absolutely, we can. I'm just not sure that the species has the wherewithal or want to like, we need to U-turn this thing. I just don't see that that's how we operate. I think the answers, if we see the answers to our problems are in front of us, I think, to some degree, which I know that goes against all of my Luddite instincts. Everything I would have said as I drag my feet. I have another buddy who's deeply spiritual, deeply connected, and he's always like, you're writing these songs Battleford, and you're always singing about the olden days. Like, are you ready for the future? Do you even want the fucking future? I'm like, dude, I'm just trying to reconcile. I came from a high value time in life, like the culture that we as Gen Xers were exposed to, because people who were running Hollywood and the cultural forces at the time, that was all hippie oriented. It was high value content, individual hero stories, and high value content. Like Gen Xers were raised on high value content. And I think that that's why Gen X has an outlook like we're trying to create high value here. We were given these individual hero narratives to sort of embody Indiana Jones and Han Solo. And, this was a part of our existence our universe in the late 80s or in the 1980s for me was I feel like I was being prepared for a time of heroic individualism, which hearing myself say that out loud, I'm sure there are people like, oh God, there's too much individualism. Individualism is why we're in the horrible problem place we are. But I don't, that's something we need to parse in a different way, I think. I don't think I'm making any more sense, Sean, but boy, I could talk about this shit endlessly. This is way more interesting than talking about music to me.
Well, I feel like music has informed all these thoughts for you.
Sure.
And I don't know if you mean this individual, like being an individual. I think it is important that we know ourselves as an individual, not like, I don't think you're meaning individual thinking, like I need everything for myself, survive. No, all the, yes, this individual, like I am going to be a individual who individuated, and I know my value. I know what I want.
100%. Like
we can be cheerful people that way.
100%. I love meeting highly individual people. It's just an obsession. Like, it doesn't really matter who it is. I don't really care what modality they live in, like what they do for work. It doesn't really matter. Highly individual. And you know what? To be quite frank, when I worked construction in Huntsville at the Kimberly-Clark plant, I was on a construction crew inside the plant. And the working men who were in that plant, who were whistling and smoking cigarettes, it goes back that long, where I thought within the context of the rural working classes, the dads of the kids that I went to school with, all those dads were highly individual. They were all highly individual guys whose individual talents were often very recognized within their small communities. Like, so-and-so knows how to fix snowmobiles. So-and-so has got a backhoe and is very talented with digging culvert holes, whatever it is. There was a sense that the individuation around the working classes that I grew up in, that each person was valued for their singular talent. And I think that in the 1980s, that was just something that I feel like I was probably led to believe you could take for granted. But that rural species of the highly individuated person, again, being a rural person, rural people always, oh, those crazy people in the city, those crazy people in Toronto. I was always cognizant as I got older and started spending time in cities. Like, I hate to break it to you, but the total crazy people are in the woods because they're unobserved. Crazy people in the city, everybody's watching them, so they're crazy, can only get so much. Fucking rural people, the crazy genius that rural individuals have is allowed to sprawl in a way because it goes unwatched. Which is why I really resonate with rural people, you know?
Yeah. I grew up rural, moved to the city, and now I have this like draw to go back to the rural parts of Alberta, where there's more land, there's more time to explore. Well, I have thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I feel like I could continue on. I'm sure you got things to do. My last question, let's imagine you're at end of life, however old you are. That's how old you are. You're sitting on the front porch, looking out at a view that brings you peace, ease, and contentment. You decide to bring a notebook out to write a message, letter, poem, song, it doesn't matter, about what Hawksley Workman has learned on how to have a successful dance between living a good life and money. What would be a theme to that letter, poem, song, whatever it is you're writing?
I think it would be I think it would be a message of living within your means. Maybe that doesn't sound cool or fun or artistic enough. Living within my financial means has given me a superpower in life that I'm just so grateful that I've had. It's allowed me to feel like I could have the freedom for my wings to spread without a feeling of some sort of clawing desperation just being in the background of my life. I feel like I could take deep breaths into the bottom of my lungs, and I'm grateful for all that stuff. And all that really is just trying to spend little. And it's not an artistic thing to say, but it's a message I would share with anybody who wants to listen, because the working classes, we go to school and we get our training in school, and a lot of things we're not taught about personal finances. The government doesn't tell us that we'd be better off if we had a will. And, there's lots of reasons to that, because sometimes having, the working class is not fully educated. It allows them to make sort of mistakes that benefit big corp or benefit the government. And I think that living within your means is the instant pathway to wealth that we don't talk about. As we see conspicuous consumption on display in social media, we're under the impression that we need the side hustle. We need to make more. We need to have our crypto investments, 10x overnight, or else we're nothing. And I'm here to say that you can have all that stuff as long as you're living within your means, or you can have much less of that stuff and still attempt to live within your means. I know it's getting harder for people as cost of living goes up and wage stagnation means that it's harder and harder and harder to live within your means. I don't want to sound like some glib fuck who doesn't have some sense of how hard that is. I've been lucky. I enjoyed part of an economy that came from another time where there was sort of a prosperity that it seemed like was never going away. All that to say that conspicuous consumption is the fastest way to being poor in lots of fronts, whether it's financial poor or spiritually poor. Frugality and a focus on your own internal narrative is, I think, the way to have a buoyant life and a buoyant financial life.
I appreciate that. I'm glad we recorded it, because now we have it forever, as long as the internet lives on. And it's a pathway to that freedom that you talked about. Hawksley, thank you so much for joining me. I thoroughly enjoyed this conversation. I've enjoyed your career as an audience member for a number of years now. For listeners who are interested in your work, your albums, you have a recent new single that came out at the end of last year.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on in your world?
I'm writing a lot. In fact, when we hang up our Zoom call here, one of my young genius buddies, Tristan Conkle from Peterborough, is going to come through the studio door. We're working on a side project right now called Electro Cutie. It's so fun. My new EP, which is called Fly Like an Ego, which obsessed that single from last year. There's a new single coming out called Save My Life. I'm always doing stuff. I'm totally restless. I feel like I don't know what I'm doing if I'm not making something. And it's one of the great gifts that has been created for me in my life, is that I get to make stuff. And this 20-year-old kid's going to walk through the door, and I'm going to get to feel like I'm 20 this afternoon. We're going to make something that's going to be so cool and fun. And he's going to say, it's dope. And I refuse to say that because I sound so ridiculous and old when I say that, but I'm going to get to hang around this kid who says that. It's just wonderful. It's wonderful. I'm a really lucky guy, and I'm lucky to have this chat with you. And I think that it's cool what you're doing. I wish that we could have more discussions about personal finance out loud, because it's such a terrifying universe in there. You know that Dave Ramsey guy who's, and he's dealing with people who are oftentimes in a very desperate situation. I sometimes listen to Dave Ramsey just because personal finance is a big part of everybody's story. Do I imagine a future where there won't be money? Yeah, I think I can kind of, but we've predicated our self-understanding on having this thing. Some people call it evil, whatever it is. It's energy. It's there, blah, blah, blah. I like this discussion. I think that sometimes when I listen to Dave Ramsey, you hear people who are even hearing their own financial predicaments come out of their mouth for the first time. And I think that if you do get behind in your finances, or if there's a month or two that are rough, even when I've had my rough times, especially when I was a young artist, and I remember looking at bank accounts that were dwindling next to nothing and just praying that phone was going to ring, it calls into question deep feelings of personal humiliation and value. And when I guess what I'm saying is it can feel lonely when you're on the inside of a personal financial problem. And it can feel like I can take this on personally, like I was a bad person or I was a stupid person. I did something stupid irreconcilably. And I think that if we were to be able to talk out loud a little bit about personal finance, we would have a lot more social understanding, because there's a lot of secrets held in people and a lot of negativity for people. The way they would see themselves negatively is wrapped up in their financial picture. And I feel like if we could eradicate how deeply personal it feels and how alone you feel inside your own financial predicament, we could all help each other to arrive at better understanding, because the whole mystery around personal finance to me is part of a conspiracy that is meant to keep people separated from their own money. When people are educated about money, they have a funny way of seeing that, oh geez, I should probably keep this stuff around, instead of it just kind of flowing through my life without me having any personal understanding of where it comes from or where it goes. Respecting money is good and important, I think.
This is what the show's about. So thank you. I need to use that as my summary. Because like Dave Ramsey, for example, he's very much on the technical side. And, we need those conversations 100% because it's real. And this conversation, it's on the feeling side of money that I'm bad. You made that comment of like, oh, I'm bad. But if you hear that, hey, this person that I know or this person on the show feels the similar way, it's like, this is this universal experience that we have with money. And I like how you mentioned its energy, because
I think that's all.
Ourselves stories about money and its energy. It's called currency, which is a form of energy. So
yeah, and water is a current, and like it's flowing. Like again, it's about plugging into ideas of abundance. I remember having this feeling as a young artist, thinking that like money is just right there. I could touch it. Like it's just right in front of me. I think when you're a poor, desperate, broke artist, it feels like money must live in a country far away from where you live. And all you have to plug into is the idea of abundance. And again, it's not tens of millions of dollars of abundance. You create the abundance through your mission of frugality. Your abundance is created by your own self-control and ability to do your future self a favor by delaying gratification today.
This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Could chit chat all day long, but you got a young guy ready to create some
music and write a rock song today. It's going to be great.
Well, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate your time.
My pleasure. Sean, I love this. Let's do this again.
Thanks for watching this week's episode. If you enjoyed the chat, please like the video and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. We'll see you next time.